Mary Martin's work is quite identifiable as Mary Martin's work, but it's also work that doesn't, is very carefully depersonalized. It's not about her. The work is allowed to have a life of its own, and as with a lot of a lot of different kinds of avant-garde art, it sort of seeks various sort of procedures through which the work can make itself and show itself, and be independent of the artist, whilst also only existing because the artist determined to make it. I think just in terms of the complications, you're surprised at how complicated the thing became. I think this is what's so wonderful about the piece, and elusive, and part of what the work expresses is a kind of, it has it. One of the words I'm thinking about quite a bit with Mary Martin stuff, because I'm trying to do a bit of writing on going back to writing about her, is the kind of ambivalence of some of her work, in terms of it not clearly being one thing or another, but a number of different things kind of combined and synthesized in an object or a construction like the Sterling piece. So it's not art like the rest of the stuff in the collection. I remember going up there, and I don't know whether this is still the same, Nikki, but the construction was high in the dining hall, and then underneath were other items from the university collection, some of which were, fine pieces. It's a fine collection, but I think, as you were saying earlier, there's something very, very different about how the construction works than, even a geometric abstract piece in a frame is going to work very differently to a wall relief. And so it's not sculpture, it's not painting, it's both at the same time. I suppose this is what I mean by the work's ambivalence. It is not a number of things simultaneously without feeling the need to be any one of them to the exclusion of others. But so the complications that come from what appears on the surface to be perhaps a relatively straightforward work is part of the wonderful richness of the piece, I think.
Yeah, I agree. And no, it's not in the dining hall anymore. It's been moved to Crush Hall, which is the big central bit in the middle of Pathwell.
Oh, right. And how high off the ground is it?
Very high. It's very high. And with the culture of like staring down at phones like this, I'm not sure many people notice it, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because unless you look up, you wouldn't see it.
Yeah, and even if you would, you might mistake it for some, part of the building's fabric, or even part of the, the service structure of the building. A bit of a plant room leaking into a. It could. I think, as you also said, people don't, even if they see it, they don't necessarily clock what it is and recognize it.
I think that's why I like it so much, though, because conventional art, sort of paintings and the things they've got on the wall, whilst most of them are abstract, you can kind of recognize it as a piece of art, whereas that you don't necessarily recognize it as a piece of art. And that's why I was intrigued by it, because I just kind of looked at it and went, what is that? Because it's so big.
And what did you think it was when you first saw it?
I mean, given where it was and that there was a lot of art surrounding it, I did think it was art, but
Yeah.
I was kind of really confused by it, because obviously I've seen sculptures and things, but I'd never really seen art like that before, so I didn't really know what to make of it when I first saw it. Spent quite a lot of time looking at it over the last, like, 6 years since I've been there.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things, isn't it? It's something to live with almost, rather than, you can look at it and it rewards some looking, but it's almost, a bit like a building, a bit like architecture. You kind of live with it, or you're alongside it, rather than necessarily looking at it in the way that you might look at a painting or even the
I'm kind
sculpture.
of sad that it's not lower down though, because obviously you don't get any of the reflections anymore, or because
Yeah,
the windows are all kind of above it as well in Crush Hall, so it doesn't even get the same light on it. And it was on a south-facing wall originally when it was installed, and then it got moved to a north-facing wall. And I don't even know what like direction it's in now. Like,
yeah. I think it's, I mean, yeah, it'd be interesting to know what if the university have plans to perhaps give it a more meaningful presentation or location. But it clearly presents a conservation challenge, and it clearly represents, yeah, I suppose potentially a health and safety
yeah,
hazard. Yeah, however that might be understood. But I mean, I've done university risk assessments, and objects like that pose, yeah, notable, present notable risks attached.
yeah, because it's wood, isn't it? So it's going to be fairly heavy to be that high up on the wall.
Yeah, it's wood with the mirrored sort of yeah, as I remember, it's kind of, they are planes with sort of angled brackets that hold near that support them.
Yeah. I mean, it's been like I likened it to Trigger's broom from Fools and Horses, because it must have had like so many pieces replaced on it. I don't know what's left of the original, but having said that, I mean, she didn't actually make it, so it's not really, it's her design as opposed to her
Yeah,
actual hands-on.
yeah, I think this is the thing with this. I mean, I'm quite interested in this with Mary Martin and with the group that she was a part of. There was simultaneously a kind of enthusiasm for working in architectural situations and having work fabricated by others, which almost inevitably happens with work at that scale. But also a determination to make their own work. So most of the work is handmade. In fact, I think the only pieces that aren't handmade are the handful of architectural commissions she did. And also then in the late 60s, she got quite excited by the idea of the multiple work of art. And so did have some works fabricated as sort of multiple editions. But there was a there was a belief, I think, they held the idea that the making was significant, and even if the craftsmanship, I'm hesitating, craftspersonship of such pieces was slightly less than it might be, that was also part of the work. There was almost a tension between the precision of the ideas and some of the slightly less than precise execution of those ideas. But obviously, when you're working on a scale, those things take on a different set of possibilities.
Yeah. And I think it is a modular piece. So I think the university, having kind of re-examined it now, I've kind of been like researching into it, and I've got loads of new material for them as an archive sort of on Mary. So I think they are planning to try and make a bit of a feature of it now, and maybe split it up, and like, because there's obviously Cottrell building, and it's never been over there. So, and they've
Yeah.
started doing that. They've started integrating different parts of that art collection into other spaces within the uni, just to try and get people interested in it. But it fits so well in that building as well. It is of that time, isn't it? So it's like that. I love that building as well.
Yeah, yeah, no, it is a lovely building. I think, I remember visiting it. I mean, one gets a sense from some of the architectural press, and when buildings are first kind of reported on, you get a sense. But I think its relationship to the landscape is really pleasant and successful. Don't know, the way the work chimes with the building, chiming with the landscape. Again, I think this is part of the expansive thing that Mary Martin was interested in doing. I mean, she always talked about, even with a small relief, it's to go on the wall, and it hangs on the wall flat so that the wall becomes a layer of the relief. So, there is an object, but its dimensions really extend beyond the limits of itself, and
Yeah.
it becomes part of the space that it's in.
Yeah, and that's the thing, especially where it is now in Crush Hall, it looks like it's meant to be there. It just looks like it's
Yeah,
always been there.
yeah,
Yeah.
amazing. No, no. I mean, one of the other things I've been sort of trying to work with is the idea of Mary Martin's constructions and sort of science fiction objects. You know, like the monolith that appears in 2001. You know, these kind of geometric shapes that appear in a number of science fiction stories, but so it's slightly mysterious. Well, in those contexts, slightly mysterious. But I think that the Mary Martin thing, it can look like it's always been wherever it is, because it has that kind of spatial presence. But yeah, that's also, again, this part of the enigma, perhaps, of the object, that it has always been there. But what is it? And where did it come from?
Edinburgh.
Edinburgh, yeah.
That's actually
London,
really interesting. I've never thought about that because I was a massive science fiction fan and like big Doctor Who fan, and the interior of the TARDIS actually could have been
yeah.
designed by one of that group of artists, couldn't it really?
Yeah, yeah. I think it's got. I think a lot of her work has that. Yeah, and with, yeah, as with science fiction, there's a kind of comment on the present by, you know, I don't know. These ideas are very loosely formed as it stands, but I think with Mary Martin stuff, it is simultaneously of its space and of the buildings it's in, but also can feel like an alien presence within that space. So it's, you know, it's both a material thing, but also somehow symbolically speaking of something else and other principles. And I think, yeah, I mean, we might get to talk about this, but the principles of the welfare state and a sort of construction of a post-war nation on, according to certain social ideas, and that the work that Mary Martin made, I believe, sort of sits very comfortably within those ideas. But also, yeah, there was, by the time the Sterling Peace was made, the climate had changed and was changing further, and the kind of buildings that were built for universities or housing was changing, and certainly the, you know, the feelings about such buildings were changing.
Yeah. I was really surprised to learn that Pathfinder had an extension on the front of it. I did not realize that at all. It was done, I think, incredibly well. Because like I've seen obviously pictures now of when it was first constructed, and the steps that jut out, they literally did jut right out and then everything else was back. But
Yeah,
now there's obviously a piece going right down the side of that. So yeah, that
right.
was in the 90s, I think. But it's been done so well, you just it looks like all the other corridors in the building. You can't tell that it's a new addition.
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, I think again with the architecture, there were ideas like the Pathfoot building was going to be the sort of the beginning. That was the first building, and other buildings would kind of grow and extend from it. And there were certain design principles that both could inform extensions whilst retaining some kind of coherence to the
Hmm.
scheme. I'm
Yeah,
interested what you were saying about how the university perhaps are only beginning to recognize what they have in the Mary Martin piece. I mean, I was up there in the late 90s, and at that time, it felt like very few people were interested in Mary Martin or post-war British constructivism. But there was at the university a degree of interest in my interest, and, you know, from that, yeah, I got the feeling there were people with quite a bit of knowledge about what they had at that time. I remember being shown the maquette, which I assume is
they've still got that. Yeah.
still got that. And then I worked on an exhibition at the Whitworth Art Gallery in Manchester in 2007, I think, called Concrete Thoughts, and the maquette was included. In fact, that
Right.
was when the maquette was substantially restored. Whitworth raised some money to actually get that maquette thing restored. But that's another beautiful little object, I think, and perhaps one that gives you because of the different scale, one obviously relates to the object differently, but it also gives perhaps one a chance to sort of think of the whole in a way that the piece itself doesn't because of its length.
Yeah.
You
Did
never.
Mary make that herself? Did she construct that herself?
I think so. I think I always assumed so, because she did that kind of thing. There was always a lot of model making, drawing. I mean, in her son Paul Martin is still around and holds a lot of the papers still. There's some incredible drawings and little visual notes towards the Sterling piece that he has,
Right.
that show the ideas that she had for color, and also the space. She's working with small sort of 3-inch square photographs of the pathfoot space, and actually then sort of drawing in the relief, to sort of presumably just to try out ideas and see what the consequence was. But I think the maquette, I would guess confidently would be made by her.
Right. That's good. I like that because they've still got that, although it's not on display anyway. Which I
Yeah,
think
one of the things, whilst in the 90s nobody seemed terribly interested in Mary Martin, 10 years later, a lot of people, not a lot, but a lot of people might be overstating it, but there was more interest, and there were a few exhibitions. People in Huddersfield made an exhibition, and Camden Arts Centre did an exhibition, which then toured to Tate St Ives and the Delaware Pavilion on the south coast.
yeah, I found I think it was the Spectator. There was was it Sotheby's that I was trying to think who it was. No, I found a piece on the from the Spectator that was about one of the exhibitions, and it was above a calf or something. Because it was telling you to go upstairs and look at it, and that was full of Kenneth and Mary's work.
No, it's more. I think that there were more people that were interested, and I think again, I think there's a number of reasons I think why people are interested in Mary Martin. The work is great. I think she's an unlikely looking artist.
Yeah.
She was a mum. I think there is plenty of evidence to suggest that in the 50s, when she was making some stunning work, but relatively few pieces, that she was bringing up the kids and doing that stuff. I don't think she and Kenneth Martin had a huge amount of money. I think they were getting by, and I think as is so often the case, I think he had the studio time and she made do with the what time was left. This is like don't know, at the risk of really going off on one, when Linda Nochlin posed the question, why have there been no great women artists? I don't know if you know that essay, but it's written in
No.
the early 70s, as part of a feminist intervention on art history. She provides a number of compelling explanations. Because there's a full critical consideration of what greatness is, as a term that, as many things do, privileges men. But the answer to the question, to really sort of crudely boil it down to a simple point, is that women were denied opportunity to make work in the way that men were allowed. And I think in spite of being a relationship of equals, Mary and Kenneth Martin, and having progressive ideas and all of that stuff, I think she still did the parents, you know, she was still the primary carer at home and etc.
It all.
Yeah.
And yet she won an award, didn't she? The John Morse Painting Prize with Richard Hamilton. She was the first woman to win. I mean, this is the thing that astounds me about this. And I did look at the feminist angle because I was kind of going to go into it, you know, saying, oh, she was like unique. And she wasn't. I mean, out of all of that, like, band of people, I think from what I found on it, it seemed to be a bit of a 50-50 split between women doing it and men doing it. Because I was thinking, oh, it's construction and they're using kind of, you know, construction materials and it'll be all men and she'll be this like, but she really wasn't. There was quite a few women.
Yeah, and this is the thing with constructivism, going back to a Russian origin story. Again, there were a number of notable women constructivists, and you know, it is to a degree, I think, sort of unique within the early 20th century isms for being much more, you know, women were prominent figures within the movement, and you know, you don't see that in other avant-garde movements quite so much. So yeah, I mean, perhaps because of the implication for engineering and construction, you know, it all sounds very traditionally male. From the outset, it's been something that women have fully participated in and driven. So it's a good thing.
It is a good thing, but is that why it's so unknown?
I think it's not that it's unknown. I think it's one of those things that appeals to certain mindsets and certain outlooks. I don't think it's terribly. It's never been regarded as a sort of terribly sexy art. You know, I think once there were some sexy projects done in Russia in the early 20s, big, large-scale things. But beyond that, it becomes slightly more sober, I suppose, and so it doesn't perhaps perform in the way that some art does, or that people want art to do. I think again, people are interested. It's interesting what you're saying earlier. You know, people wary of it because of its Russian origins. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting point. I mean, I don't think. Yeah, part of the problem is that art history, you know, has been largely written by certain, you know, written by and in the service of certain interests that are Western European, North American. So people are less inclined to, you know, acknowledge their sources, particularly if it disrupts the simple narrative that this is where the great art is made. And certainly through the 20th century, I think there was, through the Cold War, I think there probably was a resistance to anything that seemed Soviet in character. Yeah, I mean, having said that, you know, the post-war, you know, the decade or so after the war, the kind of time of construction, the time of the welfare state. I mean, this is where you see, you know, Britain at its most socialist. And even if you look at the Beveridge report, that was the blueprint for the welfare state, and Beveridge was no socialist; he was a liberal, I think. But talking about coming out of the war as a time for revolution, you know, not big political revolutions, but you know, there's an opportunity to think, how do we want to live? How do we want to organize ourselves? Some of these kind of, you know, rudimentary political questions. And he talked in the report, I think, about how there was I might be confusing. I think it's in the Beveridge report. It might be Nye Bevan or Clement Attlee subsequently picking up that report and working with it. But I think it was Beveridge who talked about there being an opportunity to synthesize or find a new space that used what was described as the economic freedoms of Eastern Europe with the political freedoms of the West, and this idea of the economic freedoms under communism was an interesting concept, I think, or that the Soviet system could in any way represent to a liberal in Britain a kind of a certain type of freedom that we might adopt. Yeah, so I think there was an appetite for certain things. I think the constructivist thing, being Russian, probably did, certainly in the 20s and 30s with Britain's first flirtation with modernism. There were plenty of voices that saw it as alien to, they would use the term British, but what they meant was English, I think, primarily.
Right.
As is so often the way. It was not the English way. And people would talk about it, in terms that we still hear, from various right-wing factions. We're under threat. Our very being is under threat from these alien ideas or cultural forms, and so there was resistance. But there was also plenty of embrace of what might be possible.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I found really interesting about this is speaking to some of the artists that I've been talking to that were either really heavily influenced by Mary or didn't realize they were, which like Ali, who was an artist in residence at Pathfoot, he drew a book like the wall construction, Mary Martin's wall construction was the first thing that he actually saw and drew in that building, and it kept him coming back because he thought it was part of the building initially. But again, he's gone on to do so much work that's been influenced by that he didn't even it was almost like in his subconscious or in his psyche that he didn't realize. And I think if you look at a lot of architecture and a lot of art, it's been heavily influenced by that period, but nobody seems to kind of relate it to it. There's like a bit of a disconnect, isn't there, between what's happening and what happened?
Yeah, no, I agree. It's an interesting trajectory. Again, I think in the 90s when I was first interested in this stuff, it was a bit live. I think people saw that architecture is still something of a threat. I think now it's moved into more of a heritage category. Post-war British architecture is now a heritage thing rather than a living, breathing threat to our cities. And so people are more fond of it. I mean, there's a building in London called Trellick Tower. I don't know if you're familiar with it. It's a sort of giant brutalist tower block, residential tower block designed by...
Is that the one with all the layers that... No.
It has got loads of layers. The most distinctive thing is its service tower sits alongside the main tower. So it's sort of two parts to Trellick. Of its type, it's a very famous building. It was designed by the architect Erno Goldfinger, who was part of This Is Tomorrow and etc. But in the 90s, this is in North Kensington, which isn't remotely like South Kensington. North Kensington is kind of inner city, tower block central, with everything that goes with that, rather than the museum district of South Kensington. But in the 90s, it was still very much sort of social housing, and there was a waiting list to get out. It hadn't been maintained. It was a challenging place to live, and now, 30 years later, 25 years later, it's one of the most desirable addresses in West London, and people are desperate to live there and will pay, as it's moved into sort of private hands, will pay, premium prices to do so. So, you have to sort of think, well, what's happened there in the architectural kind of popularity contest? It's really swung to being trendy and cool, whereas it was a symbol of all that was very wrong.
I think that might be one of the problems, hadn't it? Because like some of the architects that were rebuilding after the war in this style with the flat roofs and like the boxy construction. I mean, people hated it at the time, didn't they? Didn't appreciate it as artwork.
Yeah, I think what's yes, it did. A lot of very, very problematic places were built badly. And as with most things in British history, the Tories are to blame for it. They deregulated buildings. So around 1960s, you saw a lot of legislation change or a lot of regulation change around construction. And, it's part of the sorry criminal history of poorly constructed housing for, real life people. That buildings that fail, buildings that are from the start poorly constructed, never mind deteriorating and not being maintained, these buildings were death traps from the start. And there's one of the most famous examples from the 60s was a building in London called Ronan Point, which I don't know if you've heard of Ronan Point, but it was another residential tower block. And there was a gas leak and an explosion in one of the flats. And basically,
I have heard of that, yeah.
a quarter of the building collapsed.
Mm-hmm.
This was in 1968, I think. I mean, and one would have to check to see if this is true, but I remember hearing parts of the construction were held up by kind of wooden dowel, and it's like, you're joking. But as soon as you deregulate the building of these things, people are looking to make money, cut corners. Materials are, not fit for purpose, and you then get appalling places to live, which are just unhealthy and dangerous on any number of levels. So you can see why people would form certain ideas of those. I mean, perhaps in Sheffield there was a famous and for a time notorious place called Park Hill, which is another big public housing scheme in Sheffield. It's been revamped by a development company called Urban Splash, and it's up for the Sterling Architecture Prize. It's part of the shortlist that was just announced last week. So this is again a kind of big part of post-war British housing architecture from around 1960. There was an artist involved called John Forrester, who was sort of peripherally connected to the constructivist group. But yeah, that was again a bit like Trellick Tower. People couldn't get out quick enough, but now it's up for an architecture prize, and trendy young people are moving in.
That's crazy. I think we've covered like loads of stuff, haven't we? I just need you to describe it visually.
It's really, I think it's, as you said, it's really difficult to describe and do the piece justice in that it is. What's the dimensions, Nikki? Is it like it's about 60 feet wide, I think, and about 4 feet tall. So it's a very long, horizontal, frieze-like construction that has these four. So it has units which are diagonally halved cubes, right? And the diagonal face is sort of turned in across 4 different possible variations of the direction it could be, and then these are sort of structured into a sort of rhythm. One can sort of see that certain permutations have been employed in it, so there are certain rhythms, but also a degree of constant change. And there are patterns, and then there aren't patterns. There is a mathematical structure to it, but again, that doesn't in any way describe what the work is when one encounters it. It's a sort of spatial expression, and in a sense it feels part of what is a very functional architecture. On another level, it seems to sort of scramble and destroy the logic of the architecture because of its structures. So it does a number of things which describing it doesn't seem really possible. It sounds quite systematic, it sounds quite uninteresting. But to see it, and because the surfaces are mirrored or largely mirrored, you get reflections. So as you move, what you see changes. The light in the room fundamentally changed how it looks. It's different every time. It's like it's not, you don't see it once and then that's that. It's something that rewards repeat looking. One thing that I think is quite useful, and I used to wonder what this was, but when Mary Martin was planning the piece, she was quite into campanology, which is bell ringing.
Right.
And she was interested in so like a peal of a church bell, the kind of the rise of the rhythms and the structure of bell ringing music. She was quite interested in that, and in both the experience of it, but the notation of campanology. And I think that's quite useful in terms of thinking about how the piece performs visually. It has these kind of rhythms, it rises, it falls. There are variations within that, but I think in a sense that sort of what that conjures for me says something about what it is to experience the piece.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a very long, wide, narrow, frieze-like construction.
Very reflective, as you said. I was trying to find one of the things I wrote about it. Somebody described it as fragmenting pieces of a person so that you don't exist in the same way when you stand in front of it. And I really like that, because it really is like that. And then just the way it can reflect the sky and the movement. I think somebody else wrote about when the graduation ceremonies were going on, when it was lower down on the wall in the dining hall and reflecting the women's dresses. And I mean, I think it feels like one of those things, like it could almost be like a television where you could just sit and watch, like the way it changes the world around it as you're like sitting watching it. But you can't do that now where it is, which is annoying to me, but I get it. I get why it's up there.
Yeah, it's a shame because it has that. It has that potential to do many wonderful things, fascinating things, and again that defy the description of what sounds like a fairly dull exercise in geometric variation. It does so much more than that.
Yeah, but it's so beautiful, like in its own. It's weird, isn't it? Because it looks so simple on first look, and then you start thinking, "Hang on a minute, nothing's sitting by anything in the same way." And yeah, just look at. I mean, that's why you can sit and look at it for a long time. Like that. That's why I think it varies and differs from sort of a painting or something, where no matter how many times you look at it, you might see it differently because of personal experiences you've been through. So you could see it 10 years ago and you'll experience it differently in 10 years. But with this, you can do that like in a day. You just sit looking at it, which is weird.
Yeah, no, I totally hear that. I mean, my first encounter with Mary Martin and the group she was involved with, and another artist within that group, a guy called Anthony Hill. I was working as an invigilator at Tate Liverpool back in the 1990s, and I'd never heard of these artists. And there were a couple of pieces in a big sort of post-war European survey exhibition, and these two pieces were there doing their quiet thing. It was a small Mary Martin, a white relief from the early 1950s, no more than a foot square, I don't think. And Anthony Hill's painting was a sort of grid, 4x2 grid with a few diagonals put in. That neither were the loudest, most instant kind of, that's amazing. They didn't work like that. They just kind of they bided their time. And as an invigilator, when you're spending 8 hours a day in a gallery, it's interesting how the life of different kind of works reveals itself, and some works which do have that instant impact quite quickly become much less interesting, and the works that don't demand your attention or don't command sort of attention initially, so they slowly just sort of sit there and do a different thing, a fundamentally different thing. And it got me, certainly in that job and being in the space in that capacity, it got me really interested in this sort of boring looking work that managed to do something really quite interesting over time. And again, without necessarily demanding that you look at it, it just is there, as when buildings work, you're in them. You kind of they allow you to be in them comfortably and do whatever it is you're doing in that building. They don't demand that you attend to their aesthetics on a regular basis. You experience them in a fundamentally different way, and the constructivist art seems to do something similar.
Mm-hmm. I think with Pathfoot, you can't help but notice it as a different kind of building, just because the way some of the windows are positioned in some of the offices, and the way the building is at the back. So like if you're sitting in an office and the building, there's lots of courtyards, so you're looking out onto the courtyard, so therefore that restricts your view of the sky, and so you get the kind of this glimpse of the sky, but then it's interacting with like the greenery and the wildlife in the courtyard. So you can't sit in one of those offices and not want to just stare at the window. It's like
Yeah,
difficult. You just want to look outside.
that's architecture doing something it shouldn't do, which is
Yeah,
just
it's not great,
doing
is it? You're trying to work. You're just looking
yeah.
out the window the whole time. Yeah, that whole building I didn't realize as well had a lot of furniture designed specifically for the building. Like they had those. I can't even remember. I should have written that down. But the name of the chairs is like a metal. I mean, it looks hideously uncomfortable. Apparently, it is very comfortable, but every office had one. So, like, they designed all this architecture to go with the building. Is that unique? Is that something that normally happens?
I don't think it's something that normally happens. No, I think there was an ambition, wasn't there, to engage with design in a very particular way at Stirling, and with an ambition, to. I didn't know that about the furniture. Obviously, I know a little bit about the commissioning of the Mary Martin piece, and there's a few people there at the time who were interested and engaged with art and design,
Mm-hmm.
and wanted that to be a significant part. I mean, commissioning Mary Martin, that was a significant commission for the university as well as for Mary Martin. So there was clearly an ambition. I think it is, special. It's a special story, the Stirling story. It might not be unique, but I can't think of another one like it in terms of that attempting, not a totalizing sort of vision where everything has to be one way, but thinking of the building, the furniture, the art as part of an expression of something compatible, that the work is speaking and expressing something which creates this coherence throughout. So there's a sort of modernist language, I suppose, but it's a sort of particular type of modernism, isn't it? In terms of what we've talked about with the building's relationship to the landscape, what you've just said about the way Pathfoot works with the courtyards and these, quite interesting sort of glimpses of the sky. It's not like it's not offering full panoramic views. It's almost offering glimpses, isn't it? And it's discreetly within the landscape. So it's not a, what am I trying to say? It's not a kind of aggressive modernism. It's a sort of tantalizing, puzzling sort of almost set of games that the building sets up.
Yeah, it's such a good space though to be in, and it kind of really inspires me and calms me. And it's like got a New York structure with like its blocks. So
Yeah.
for me, it's really, because I'm autistic, so it's really easy for me to navigate that building, as opposed to Cottrell, which is designed by the devil himself. I mean, I've been there 6 years. I've never walked around that building and not got lost, not once. And I've been in there a lot. So why would you
Well,
design a
yeah.
building like that?
this is university buildings do have a habit of being more like the cultural experience than the
Yeah,
practical experience. But Cottrell, I mean, this is it Tom Cottrell who
yeah.
was
And he's the one that commissioned the Mary Martin piece originally as
yeah
well, because he was the first principal. So
yeah. So it seems, I mean, he does seem to have been again engaged in this stuff. Yeah, not just going through the motions as somebody else is interested. A number of people there seem to be interested. It sounds like a very poor memorial to him and his contribution to sort of build a very different kind of building.
yeah, I know. I don't know what he would. I think he'd
No.
be honoured to have it named after him. But if you knew how complicated and difficult it was to navigate, and literally the second I step in the door, I get anxiety because I'm just like, I'm gonna get lost. I'm not
Yeah,
gonna get to where I need to be.
I think what's really, I mean, it's interesting the points you've made there about your experience of the buildings, because Pathfoot and again the Mary Martin construction are very sort of clear and legible things, but they're also stimulating. They're not, you know, they're not devoid of expression or interest, and that's quite a impressive balancing act to perform. I mean, as we sort of we sort of moved from the kind of the clarity of modernist design to, I mean, I work with a number of students who do work on accessible design, and some of that stuff is sort of picking up some of the principles that inform modernist design, but from a much more, from a different angle. But some of the things that come with accessible design seem to almost work against design expression.
Yeah,
And so when you get people who can reconcile, the need, the clear need for accessibility and legibility with some kind of expression of something that in itself is rewarding, like the Pathfoot building and the way
mm,
one can exist there and interact with it, and the Mary Martin sculpture, that they can do both things. They can be clear and legible, and they can help you navigate. They don't. It's not like a labyrinth that changes every time you go there. It's always the same. But then, perhaps it's then because of the way the light is orchestrated and the way the spaces sort of reveal themselves within the landscape and within themselves, that's that is stimulating. It's what's the word I'm looking for? Rewarding to be in
mm,
that space. It's not just the case of I need to get from A to B and I don't want any sort of obstacles. It's actually I want to be in this space because every time I'm here, it feels in tune with the day or whatever. So it's a beautiful thing that it can do both. If that makes sense, sort of be both an accessible and clear and reassuring space, a safe space, and a functional space, but also have that kind of poetry,
mhm. I
which
don't know
is
how accessible it is for people in wheelchairs. That's the only thing, because
ah
obviously it was built on a tiered system, wasn't it? And there's a lot of
yeah
steps. You can't go
yeah
anywhere without steps in it. And I literally, until you said that, I hadn't even thought about how you would navigate that building. Clearly, they've made ways to make it
yeah
accessible, but I don't know how you do it. I can't see it being an easy process, to be honest.
no no interesting stuff. Yeah, I mean, I suppose I mean accessibility on the widest.
Yeah,
In, uh, Totally with wheelchair access is kind of entry level
yeah,
accessibility, right? But spaces that are accommodating of everyone is
yeah. And it's the lateral light and stuff. I mean, it feels kind of like a greenhouse. I mean, it's certainly got the temperature of a greenhouse during the summer, and it's
as a,
like with all the windows and stuff, it's just really pretty. It doesn't matter where you look. It's almost like the building itself. I suppose it is art, given its age and stuff, but it's almost like it is art because whichever way you look, there's almost a picture that's framed by a window. So yeah, yeah, I love that building so much.
I think one of the ideas, an architect who worked quite regularly with Mary Martin, an architect called John Weeks, and he's long gone now, but I did have an opportunity to meet and get to know John Weeks quite a bit in the 90s. And he worked with Mary Martin at This Is Tomorrow and a hospital in Belfast. But he, in the 1960s, developed this idea of what he called indeterminate architecture, and it was largely out of hospital design, but this idea of a design, an architectural design that had the potential to grow or shrink or kind of be used differently without losing its kind of coherence as a space. So classical architecture, which is sort of dependent on degrees of symmetry, it restricts. It's not an expansive model. So he was interested in an architecture that could expand and allow that expansion to happen, enable it to happen, rather than cause problems for it. And I think the path-foot thing, and even what Mary Martin was doing in the 1960s, this kind of extendable thing, this kind of modular principles which could be applied in multiple situations, always be coherent, always be what it is, but have that flexibility and that kind of openness to being used differently. And, again, thinking of what was achieved at Pathfoot is something like that, both on a sort of formal architectural level, but again, in relationship to like the light that you're talking about, that it's a building that almost stages the unique light of each day rather than having to be always the same. It totally embraces the changing seasons and changing, the weather of Scotland, right?
Yeah, which literally can be different depending on which window you're looking out of in Pathway, which is hysterical.
Yeah, absolutely. Wonderful stuff. It's wonderful to hear there's interest in it, and interest in it from the university as well as from you. So it's wonderful to hear there are ideas of rethinking and representing the work. All of that seems absolutely part of the work's history and ongoing history. There's just a very different thing. There's a writer on photography I like called Ariella Aisha Azoulay, and she writes about photography, and she sort of is keen to ask new questions about photography. But she says instead of looking at a photograph, we should start watching a photograph, because it has a life and it changes, and what the way the image performs, the uses the image is put to by different people in different times. So there's not just this one image to look at and it's all there within the dimensions of the photograph. This is something that has a life, so you watch it rather than look at it. And I quite, it's an idea that interests me, and an idea that slightly escapes my full understanding. But I like the idea of watching something rather than looking at it, because it will change and you've got to keep your eye on it, because just as soon as you think you know it, it's become something else and it's now doing a different job and it's holding different meanings. And that's exciting, as well as being rather, I suppose, unsettling in the sense I thought I knew what that was and now look, it's changed. And rather than feeling sort of unsettled and concerned by that, actually thinking, well, this is the way everything is and probably should be, and certain things express that.
I think things have to change as you get to know them deeper, because I think the reason I was drawn to that in the first place, it was huge. And I think that's why I was so drawn to it. I was just like, that's huge. But I didn't know anything about it. And I think since I've learned like loads of stuff about it, my opinion of it has changed vastly. So I think as your understanding betters on something, then you get a different, I'm looking at it in a different way. So effectively I am watching it. Since I've been there in 2019, I've been watching it the whole time.
Yeah, and I think that's really that's a wonderful thing that the object does, and it's a wonderful way of thinking about it. I remember when you were first in touch and you were talking about, it was one of the first things that you encountered at the university, and it's been on a journey with you, and you've been on a journey with it. And so there's a sort of personal connection with the piece in terms of that experience you've had at the university, and that's, again, I think that's oddly in tune with the work. I think this is, that article I wrote recently on the Kenneth Martin Hospital project, and this idea of the mobile as an expressive unit, and you think, well, okay, what is it expressing? And what it's expressing is this social environment, this architectural environment. It's almost something which condenses an expression of that thing, but also something that articulates attention to sort of see that whole thing. So it kind of works in multiple ways, but what it isn't is just an object in and of itself. It's an object in this kind of context, and it helps us see that context, and the context helps us see the object somehow.
It's funny because Ali, whilst claiming he knew nothing about Mary or Kenneth, ended up making a mobile, which is still in place. The university bought it, and it's ever changing and ever moving. And they actually had a massive flood, and it was made out of foam, so it bent slightly. So now it's a bit bent as well. But he decided to leave it there because he thought that was part of its kind of, I don't know, the interest of it, the fact that people might look at it now and be like, is that meant to be bent? Because it mirrored all the different sort of spaces in Pathfoot. But it's really cool. So yeah, and I don't think people don't appreciate simplicity sometimes and how complicated it can be in its environment. And I really like that piece that you wrote about that, because I broke my back once and I was lying on a hospital bed looking up at a ceiling. And I did actually think then, why is nobody making art for like people flat on their back lying in bed? Because I mean, that would have been interesting to look at. It would have been thought provoking, and instead of just like the ceiling.
Yeah. I think the ceiling, the space between the floor and the ceiling is that's the space that Kenneth Martin was interested in. And having a captive audience of hospital inmates, hospital patients.
It's kind of funny now thinking about how sort of renowned his work has become. If you're one of those kids just lying in your bed thinking, what is that? And disregarding it a little bit.
Yeah, and it not minding if you did disregard it. It didn't matter. It's a really beautiful project, that one. And I think, just the fact that he was, well, there was the doctor in the hospital wanted it to happen, and Kenneth Martin wanted it to happen. There were these kind of unique combinations of personnel enabled it to happen. But to have the idea of doing it, doing something for a month in a hospital ward, and it kind of it was an exhibition, but it wasn't really. It was something that happened in a functioning hospital. It's, again, sort of, I think, kind of, for me, sort of telling of the kind of spirit of Kenneth Martin's work and Mary Martin's work, that it is at its best in those sort of social contexts of post-war Britain, whether it be the National Health Service or state housing, council housing, or new universities and schools. It's like these are the institutions of the welfare state, and that's where they saw their work. That's where they wanted their work to be, because that was the principles that their work aspired to speak of.
Yeah. No, that's been amazing. Thank you so much for speaking to me about this. It's been really good.
Yeah, it's been really nice.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time. Hope you get back to your painting. Bye.
Oh, thanks, Nikki. All right,
Thanks
you take
a lot.
care.
And you have a great day. Bye.
Bye.
This podcast was created by Nicola Foley and hosted on Buzzsprout, with music from Pixabay. A huge thank you to Sam Gathercole for chatting with me. I really appreciate you spending your time here, and I hope you'll join me next time.